Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to the Blood Red Morning Bulletin. I'm your host for today, Patrick Smith, and you can join me every day this week from 10 a.m. on the Blood Red YouTube channel. This is a live broadcast bringing you the latest Liverpool FC news, and I'm joined today by Liverpool.com editor Matt Addison. Matt, how's things?
Yeah, all good, mate. Good to look out the window and see some sunshine this morning. It's been absolutely pouring with rain, hasn't it, for ages? So it feels like summer again, and we've got another pre-season friendly to look forward to.
Yeah, it has been really, really bleak, as you say, isn't it? I was meant to be at the cricket at the Ashes on Saturday. Of course, rained out. The beautiful weather we get in the northwest, Matt, isn't it? You couldn't complain, could you? The middle of July, pouring rain. But anyway, yeah, as you say, there is a Liverpool friendly to look forward to today. They're taking on German side Greuther Furth at 12 p.m. kickoff. So me and Matt are going to have a bit of a preview of that one now. So Matt, let's get straight into it, shall we? I mean, there was a friendly last week, Karlsruhe. What are you hoping to see today from the Greuther match? Is it a similar state of getting those minutes in the legs, or can we maybe see some more patterns of play and a bit more, tactical development in today's match?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things you can look out for. I think we saw a little bit of the inverted role in terms of Conor Bradley was kind of doing the Trent role. Trent was doing the Fabinho thing. I think that'll kind of be something that we probably can have a little look out for today. I think that's certainly one thing that I'd be interested to see whether they continue with that. I assume that they probably will, given that they've started with that. Obviously, we'll come on to a couple of the other youngsters and a couple of other bits a little bit later on. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that we can look out for. But I think the other thing for me is sort of how the attack starts to form. I think for Liverpool this summer, I think there's still loads of question marks about the midfield. There's still a need, I think, for a left-sided defender to come in before the end of the transfer window. But the one area that Liverpool are really well stocked in is in the attack. You look at the options that they've got. I've written something for our newsletter today, which I basically think that Mohamed Salah is guaranteed his place, but then the other two for the first game of the season against Chelsea in 3 weeks. I mean, it could really be any combination of the other four players. I think
you could throw him in a hat, couldn't you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really difficult to know which way it goes. I think Luis Diaz could have an excellent season. Diogo Jota looked sharp last week. Darwin Núñez scored, but didn't necessarily look quite so good, and probably should have, been a little bit more instinctive. And I just think there's so many combinations. I'm a huge fan of Cody Gakpo as well. So I'm not going to read loads into which three are the first three on the team sheet for today, just like we didn't for last week. But I do think it's going to be interesting over the course of these friendlies to just see which team Jurgen Klopp ends up with the attackers. And obviously that can change throughout the season. But I do think it's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's only pre-season, but it's interesting how even in that one pre-season match, it sort of represents all those attackers' individual contributions to Liverpool in, the whole season. I mean, Jota didn't exactly play brilliantly, but he had the best goal up. I mean, 2 brilliantly taken goals. That's what Diogo Jota does. He can do nothing, get those goals. Luis Diaz looking very good. And Núñez, again, looking a tad clumsy, I'll say, but then also he got a goal, so who cares? It'd be interesting to see how that one does pan out, because I don't even know if Jurgen Klopp has any idea who he's going to start on the first Premier League match of the season, but maybe the new numbers for Diaz and Núñez may hint at that. Who knows? Time will tell. But I'm going to go back to the number 6 position, because obviously last week, we saw Trent shift into that role on the ball last season, while starting as right back on the team sheet. But he was on the team sheet as a number 6. If he's on the team sheet as a number 6 again today, do you think that maybe hints at Jurgen Klopp perhaps changing his mind on his stubborn position, shall we say, on Trent playing in midfield?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there? I know there's been a few pieces written over the last few days and in various places about this. And I'm probably going to go against the grain a little bit. I don't think we should read too much into him being in midfield. I think for me, it will probably be Trent in that same position again today. But I think for me, the reason why that was the case last week was just purely that there wasn't any other option but to do that. You think of, Henderson at that point had gone back to do his medical for his move to Saudi. Fabinho didn't even go to Germany, so he couldn't have been involved because he's in a similar position. Tyler Morton has got a little injury at the moment. Stefan Bajcetic is still training on his own because he's not back yet. Thiago is similar because he had a similar sort of season-ending injury in March, April time, I think, for both of those players. So you've gone through 5 players there who ordinarily could have played ahead of Trent in that position, but none of them are there. There's no real obvious options. James McConnell played the position in the second half, but it's not really a position that he's played in either. He's more of an attack-minded midfielder that was kind of put into that role just because there was nobody else. So I think, for me, look, there's an obvious need for Liverpool to go out and get at least one, probably 2 more defensive-minded midfielders before the end of, ideally, obviously before the end of the transfer window, but hopefully within the next few days, so that that player can get into this sort of position for Chelsea. So it's a hard one to know long term. It's a possibility that Trent might play that position against Chelsea because, at this point, we're not that far away from that game happening. If Liverpool haven't got somebody in by the end of this week, suddenly you're starting to think that there's not that much time to integrate them. It'd be difficult, I think, even for a senior player to come in and just slot straight into that team, maybe play one friendly and then start the first game of the season as a number 6. I think that would be tricky. So I don't think it's something that Liverpool are working towards for this season. I don't think it's something we're going to see loads, but we might see it a little bit early on just because they just don't really have any other options at the moment. And I'm sure that will change. It's more a question really of whether that changes quickly enough for that to then become the solution, if you like. And I like what I've seen from Conor Bradley, but I do think it would be a big step up for him to start matches at the start of the season. If Trent's going to play that number 6 role, it is going to have to be him that comes in at right back. And long term, that's not necessarily an issue, but I think it's a big step to go from Bolton to Liverpool in one jump.
Yeah, as good as he was last season, Bradley, I mean, by all accounts, one of the best players in League One. I think he got various accolades. Bolton Player of the Year, I think it was as well for him. But it's a really good point you raised, Matt. I know the bids for Henderson and Fabinho are a bit unprecedented. No one would have expected this to come. They sort of came out of nowhere, didn't they? And all of a sudden, both players are gone. But the point you make about players being integrated into the team now, because the likelihood is, say Liverpool sign them next week, that player would then have to fly straight off to Singapore for those 2 friendlies, straight back to Liverpool, move into Merseyside and play in the Premier League a week later. I mean, obviously, Klopp would integrate them slowly into the team, but it is getting a bit last minute for that one, isn't it? I mean, we'll come back to the pre-season preview, but as we're on the number 6 position, let's talk a bit about it, because for Fabinho, there's a bit of a spanner in the works potentially for his transfer. As someone in the comments said very hilariously, the Fabinho situation is barking mad. Basically, his dog isn't allowed into Saudi Arabia due to certain laws on breeds of animals entering the country. Although someone rightly says in the comments, the CEO of Al Ittihad has flown to London to finalise the deal. I mean, is there anything at all to read into this, Matt? Are Liverpool maybe looking for an excuse due to the very depleted number 6 market out there?
Yeah, it's a strange story, isn't it? I don't know, how true this is or how big of an issue this will be in terms of the deal. I think it is slightly surprising how long this has dragged on. It's been a couple of weeks, hasn't it, with both Henderson and Fabinho now, where we've known that this was going to happen, that they were going to leave. We've known broadly what the fees were going to be. We knew it wasn't going to be a huge amount for Henderson. It's probably slightly less in terms of the 12 million than what they probably would have wanted. But Fabinho, it's kind of been, 40 was the asking price. They've just paid that 40 and that's kind of going to happen at some point. And I still think both of those deals will happen. But I just wonder whether it's just a case of Liverpool trying to slow things down a little bit, give themselves a little bit more time, try and get maybe one player at least on the verge of coming in before you start to let these players go and these things become official in terms of, announcing Henderson and Fabinho had gone and not having anybody coming in. That just adds a little bit more pressure. And maybe it's just a little bit of a PR move almost to make sure that they're in, a decent position heading into next season. But
yeah,
I don't know. I wouldn't be massively concerned about the issue with the dogs. I think that sounds like something that can be resolved fairly quickly, I would think.
Yeah, funnily enough, me and Matt, everyone don't know our Saudi Arabian laws on dogs to the letter of the law. So, yeah, can't give you a great insight on that one, but I think they're sorting it if their president's flown over to London. I'd be very surprised if it was held back for that. But, talking of number 6 is then a transfer that I would absolutely love and probably the only player potentially on the market with a higher value than Fabinho who I'd like Liverpool to sign is Joshua Kimmich. Matt, there's reports today from various Spanish outlets and a couple of German outlets that Liverpool have sent a proposal over for him. What would you make of that transfer then? Because he's a very talented player, can obviously play right back as well. He's German, spoken with Jurgen Klopp. It's almost a perfect signing, right, isn't it?
Yeah, you can do a bit of right back and a bit of midfield, can't you? So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me in terms of the appeal. Obviously, very experienced, could slot straight in, you'd imagine. I don't know. He's probably on the older side of players that Liverpool would be targeting. I think he'd probably cost a fair bit of money. I'm not quite sure in terms of his contract situation, but certainly in terms of his salary, it's going to be fairly substantial amount. So I mean, look, it'd be one that if Liverpool got that one done, that would be certainly something that I would be up for. I think, like you say, there's not loads of options that jump out as being really obvious players. I think Romeo Lavia is obviously one that they've looked at. There's definitely interest there, but that was the case well before, Fabinho and Henderson were looked at by the Saudi club. So I don't think that's necessarily one that you could accelerate and say, well, Fabinho's gone, so let's just do the Lavia one, and that's kind of one in and one out. I think that would be a little bit of a risk. I do think it has to be someone a little bit more experienced. That's why, for me, the other one on the list is Sofian Amrabat. That kind of makes a little bit of sense. Yeah. I'm not necessarily a huge fan. I've not seen loads of him. I'm not completely convinced that, he can reach the levels of peak Fabinho, but probably he's not going to be any worse than Fabinho was for much of last season. And you think of his sort of age, I think 26, 27, could come in and be a little bit more of an instant fix, really, rather than someone like Lavia. Probably has a very high ceiling and, potentially could, eclipse Fabinho in a couple of years' time. But whether that's the case right from day one, he might take a little bit of time. There might be a couple of mistakes and little bits of his game that need ironing out. So I think experience is something that I would be looking for. Kimmich would obviously bring loads of that. I can see why the appeal might be there for him. It's almost a little bit like the Thiago one, isn't it? Where he's done it for so long at Bayern. He's kind of done that now, What more can you achieve? You're going to win the league every year. He's obviously been there for a substantial amount of his career. So it makes sense to a certain degree. Whether that's something that Liverpool can get done, I don't know. Obviously, the Harry Kane thing is interesting as well. Obviously, Bayern open to maybe selling one or two other players in order to fund that move. So I don't know. It kind of feels like there's possibly something in that. I don't know how true it is, but I think if it was something that was a possibility of the rather limited list of options that have been named so far, I think that will probably be my preference.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real headache around that position, isn't it? Because, Liverpool, I think it's a terrible idea, completely stripping out and changing the entire midfield in one transfer window. And I think if you were to do that and bring in a load of kids, bring in Romeo Lavia at 19, McAllister and Szoboszlai are still relatively young. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think you need someone who's a bit more experienced. I know that goes against the grain of a typical Jurgen Klopp signing, but you need that marquee midfielder. And I think they need someone like Joshua Kimmich in there, or at least Sofian Amrabat, someone a bit more experienced, especially in that holding midfield role, to help everyone around them. Because if Liverpool are in a tricky situation with this new midfield again, like they were last season, and you're turning to an 18-year-old Stefan Bajcetic or a 19-year-old Romeo Lavia in midfield, that could be a recipe for an absolute disaster, I think. But we'll see how it goes, because who knows how that one's going to pan out. The market, as I say, is a very, very thin one. I'm not entirely convinced by Caicedo for 100 million or Lavia for 40 million. It just doesn't bode well, I think, for Liverpool. But anyway, talking of young players, Matt, let's go back to today's pre-season friendly. You mentioned McConnell, did pretty well, I thought, out of position. Who else can we keep an eye out for today then against Greuther Furth? Which youngsters are going to be featuring for Liverpool that the listeners should keep an eye out for?
I think it's the same two that I always mention, to be honest. Bobby Clark, I'm a huge fan of him. I think we saw a few glimpses. He looked a little bit like Harvey Elliott with the dyed blonde hair last week and that sort of gliding across the pitch in midfield. I think he's just a brilliant talent. He's someone that I just love to watch. And I think he's the exact kind of player that you can get excited about, I think, in terms of that midfield area. So, he's not necessarily one that's going to make a huge impact when the season starts, but I think he should get, a good number of minutes today. You think of the lack of midfield options that Liverpool have got. I'm sure he will be involved. And he's one of those that is, he's got a very good chance, I think, of making it at Liverpool long term. There's probably one or two who are there who, they're not probably going to ever make a senior appearance for Liverpool, but I suspect that he might be one that can sort of kick on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think in terms of a possible loan, I think he might be ready to go out and maybe do a season in the Championship or something like that. But yeah, for today, certainly he is one to watch out for, and Ben Doak is the other one. Again, fairly obvious. I'm not exactly breaking any huge news there, but I think we saw a little bit of his directness and positivity last week. He's just got so much confidence, hasn't he? He's a player that you can just give the ball to and he'll try stuff, and I think Liverpool really do like that. I know Pep Lijnders has spoken about it in the past in terms of he just likes the kind of fearlessness. It's similar with Cade Gordon, who's obviously still with the 21s at the moment, trying to build his fitness up after sort of 18 months on the treatment table. So yeah, I think those two are the ones to really watch. given the lack of midfield options, and Dominic Szoboszlai, we think is probably not going to be involved because of a minor injury. I'd imagine that James McConnell will probably get another go. Conor Bradley, I'm sure, will be there again. He's certainly one to keep an eye out for. I'm not quite sure where Mel Frauendorf is up to. I think he had a little bit of a knock that kept him out of the first friendly. So I think he's trained since. So possibly he might be involved as well. He's another one to play in that midfield. But I think for me, the two to watch, not just today, but for the coming season, I think are probably Clark and Doak. And I'm sure Conor Bradley will be in there or thereabouts as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Ben Doak this season will be, that replacement right winger. I think we'll maybe see him starting in the Europa League and the Cup games this season. I think he's ready. And Bobby Clark as well. He's such an exciting talent. And maybe he'll get that break in the Liverpool midfield this season in the odd game here or there. And I was going to say Conor Bradley until you mentioned him. I think he was actually very tidy last week. We know he's a brilliant player, both on the ball and relatively solid off it for his young age. He's one that I'd potentially like to see, worst case scenario, be a backup right back this season. I think he's actually good enough technically, but it's a big role for him to fill. Of course, we'll do an academy show over on before the season starts. We've got loads of various reporters at the Echo, like Keith McDonald and Matt, of course, covering the academy. So we'll make sure we get a show done on that to preview everyone who's wants to keep an eye out for ahead of the season. But yeah, as for today, there's plenty of coverage of Liverpool's friendly against Greuther Furth across the Echo and Liverpool.com, and of course Blood Red. So make sure everyone that you're subscribed to all the Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels, and wherever you get your podcasts from, so you don't miss any of our daily content on Blood Red, and of course the articles from our brilliant writers like Matt. But yeah, for now, thank you for joining us on the Morning Bulletin. We'll be live again with a debrief show later today to review Liverpool's friendly and go through all the major talking points. So make sure you check back to the Blood Red channel for that one.